Good morning. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your Consciousness Transformation Ascension Guide, originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. Who is triggering you? And when we say trigger, who gets you annoyed? Who makes you get angry, frustrated? Who do you feel, brings you grief in your life and all that kind of stuff? It's interesting because I have more, more and more conversations, and we talk about this all the time. It's such a habit to say, "Oh well, I feel great," but this person, they make me so irritated, or they drag me down, or they make me, just feel so icky, or there's just like flat out anger of like that person's just a jerk or an idiot, or I can't even think the words. So we're so used to doing that, we don't realize how much of a habit it really is. I do it sometimes myself. I mean, and it's not really even close to the extreme as I know that, culturally many do, but it's something that we're just in such a habit of. And what we call that in spirituality and consciousness is projection. And projecting something onto somebody else is when we take, basically, I think of it as an arrow, like we shoot an arrow at somebody, expect them to take the pain for it. And so we say things like, yeah, well, you made me feel like this, and this person makes me so angry because of this, or they're such idiots. Oh, these kind of people are such idiots, or you people, right? That happens a lot. So when we are becoming more conscious and we're living in a different way, one of the biggest things for us to do is to look at what is causing us to feel that way. And, there are people, and, we, like in culturally accepted to gossip. And even if it's not called gossip, it's like talking about other people in a negative connotation. Or we talk about the things that really irritate us about somebody, or whatever. And we're in such a habit of doing that, we allow it to perpetuate and sit on the table without really looking at what that means for us, right? So the more we do this stuff, the more we live in consciousness, the more we are to be aware of everything that we do, and everything that affects us or is in our reality is something we've created to reflect something back to us. Everything. So some people will say, oh, I can take this, but I can't take that. Oh, I can understand this, but I can't take no, the president's not, me. And I'm like, yeah, but it is. When we start living in a place of oneness, all the elements of everybody, even the most annoying, angry, negative person is still a part of us, of me, of you. And as we go into that realization, part of the journey is getting past judgment, right? Hi, Stacy Lynn, and hi, Linda. Is getting past judgment and realizing that we do this because we're judging somebody else. And when we judge somebody else, it's still based in duality. It's based in the idea that there's a right and a wrong, that there's a good and a bad, that there's a good way to do something and a bad way to do something. That somebody can have a better or worse choice of what their journey looks like, and that what it implies is that we know better, right? I know better than them because I would do this or I wouldn't do this. And because they're not listening to us, because they don't do something that we want them to do, or they don't do it the way we expect them to do it, we then berate them and call them ignorant, idiots, all kinds of names. And we stay in this separation. So when we do that, we perpetuate separation. We perpetuate exclusion, which then also denies us our own journey of fulfillment and realization, because we're not looking at how it's reflecting on me and why it's triggering me to feel that way to begin with, right? So, for example, I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, something that was really frustrating me about my husband, right? I just finally came around and realized it was just something that was hidden beneath that was the frustration with myself about something very related in energy, but I didn't want to look at that. So I'd rather, put it on him. That's what we do in relationships. And I'm really conscious about that. I'm very conscious to stay in self-responsibility, and we still slip. I still slip, even in that consciousness, because it's such a habit. And I'm like, okay, so this one thing still pervades. So then once I change that perspective, I say, okay, So if the world and my reality is a mirror to me, what is it that is irritating me about what I see in that mirror that's presenting to me as my husband, right? Or, and like it is like in the president or my neighbor or my best friend or my daughter or my parent. What is it that does that? And we never stop. We don't tend to stop and think about that. We just continue on, and we feel good putting something on them, and we shoot an arrow. I think that's how I think of it energetically. So we're shooting an arrow at somebody and expecting them to take it, and then okay, it feels better because I don't have to take the point of it, right? Except what we don't realize is that there's a long tether that goes with that arrow, and it's still going to be there. So even if it comes out of that person, we're going to still have it and feel like we need to shoot it to somebody else. And so what I always talk about is how the nastiest people who are nasty, negative, and all kinds of I can't even think of other words. It's so funny because it's just so out of my vocabulary, but nasty and negative and all kinds of stuff. People who are like that are those who have the most unhappiness inside of them. So when we start, and see, here's the funny thing, we talk about compassion, but compassion is really an egoic twist on the idea of oneness. Okay, so compassion talks about, if you look at the definition, it's like having pity for somebody's misfortunes, which is judgment that somebody has a misfortune, that their journey is gone wrong, or there's something bad or whatever. That's another story for a different day. But really, it's realizing true compassion is remembering that we're all part of the same oneness. We're all part of the same divine consciousness, and we're all just different facets of the same consciousness. And when we look at that and say, okay, so you and I are the same. What if, and so then we start talking about multiple lifetimes. Well, what if I was that person in another life? What if I exactly did that in this other life, and I was so self-loathing and everything else that I struck out at people and I was negative, because we've done all of that. And what was going on? Maybe it's there to look at something for me to resolve within myself. From maybe if we don't want to put it into this life, we can put it into other lives, for maybe another life, from another situation, maybe something you want to look at that we weren't willing to look at before within ourselves, to say, oh yeah, well, when I was there, or when I feel into that, I know it has to do with feeling really sad and lonely, abandoned, all kinds of stuff. And then what's funny is, as soon as you start to understand this, you start to change your energy around those other individuals. So we have a lot of layers of what that is all about. We have a lot of layers of why we're connected with people. And so when we say, I'm done with somebody, I don't feel like I need that in my reality anymore, and it pervades, that means there's still something that's unresolved within us that has to look at it, right? So I don't like going to political discussion, because I'm not really going to go into anything personal. I'm just going to say, so many are very triggered by the state of the political affairs in this country, including the presidency and those in power. And I hear, oh, it's not my president. Oh, it's not this. Oh, da 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 da, and it's constant berating and negativity and all kinds of, and we make fun of it. We do all this kind of stuff. And then those of us who say, okay, well, I didn't vote for this person, so therefore it's not my choice. But the thing is, if we're here and present, then it was our choice at some level, at some collective level. So then the question is, if you're so triggered by this individual, then the thing to step back and do is say, what is it that's still reflecting back to me individually and as part of the collective that still exists to look at, to resolve, to complete and resolve, and to assimilate back into the whole? And it's when we do that, not only collectively, but individually, that we can actually resolve it. And then we don't ever have to worry about those kind of frictional, I think it's a word I made up a while ago, frictional kind of situations just don't happen anymore. They start to happen less and less. So, take the person that irritates you the most, that brings you the most grief, that makes you so angry, right? That you feel like they betrayed you, they perpetrated you, somebody who abused you, or all kinds of things, like who you hold the biggest trigger about in your life, and step back and say, first of all, that is another reflection of me. That's another part of me. Second of all, like, my understanding is we've all, in this whole expression of duality as the divine, gone through so many different lifetimes. And if there's no space and time, we're all the same, maybe in different lifetimes, right? Where like you and I are the same, having a different lifetime, but in the same time and space period, which can sort of blow people's minds. But and so if that's the case, it's like, wouldn't you, if that was you, which it is, right? Essentially. Sarah says, super triggered today. Thanks for these reminders. Yeah. So the thing is, like, when we can say, okay, if that's me and I'm having that experience, okay, there's obviously a purpose for that note in the current symphony, not only of my reality, but of the whole reality. So I honor that journey, and I can do that with love without taking on their stuff. And I don't have to be sucked into it. I don't have to be taken down by it. I can walk away from it, and I can say, you know what? Thank you for you taking that part of the journey on, and I'm going to go have my journey over here, and that's all fine. But then you don't feel like the need to shoot the arrows out. You don't need to point it at anybody and send out the stuff. So, it was a discussion I had with my oldest. I remember when she was in middle school and she was having some problems, some weird drama middle school problems. That I said there was this one friend that just, it did everything, had been her best friend, did everything to try to like make her look bad to other people and everything else. And I said, well, you realize it's only because she's jealous. And I remember having this discussion, and she just looked at me like I had two heads. What do you mean? She talks badly about me all, like she's been talking badly about me, everybody. I'm like, right. Because that child had lost her mother, had a very absent father who remarried very quickly, and then sort of dumped her on the stepmother who had two kids of her own, or they had a kid together, something like that. And so she was pretty much ignored. And so she felt abandoned and everything else. And we had a very tight family unit. And I'm like, well, so she's jealous and she feels uncomfortable because you're okay with life, and so she wants to take you down. That's because she feels bad about herself. I'm like, so you got to remember that when people are that way, that's something within, there's something that you are emanating that they feel like they're in lack of, so that you're also reflecting back to them. So sometimes people who could be just totally normal to everybody else, there might be somebody who's totally triggered by you, right? I was reading something, there was some public stuff going on the other day about a pretty prominent person in the spiritual community who is being accused of something, and by somebody else in the pretty prominent in the spiritual community. And I was going back and forth on their Facebook pages and looking at what was going on. And so, of course, right away, then you have people supporting one person, you have people supporting the other. And it's like, but there are very few people that were taking this neutral stance of saying, okay, so what was this experience with that individual that brought that up within you? What did that reflect within you? What was that something for you to resolve and complete within yourself, or heal, right? So that you can move on and not have that experience again. Because it doesn't matter if it was this person or somebody else, it's going to be the same thing over and over until we look at it, right? Which is why many people have the same toxic relationship over and over again in their life, even with people who don't usually have toxic relationships, because of that reflection that they need to have that brings it up in the mirror for them to look at. So anyway, so I was watching this going back and forth, and there was no one that I saw that was having a neutral reaction to it, to say, okay, so what is this experience a catalyst for both of you? Like, what is it showing to you, right? And that's what when I work with people, that's what I talk about. And I've had multiple people get very angry with me and actually stop talking to me, stop coming to me for sessions, or just stop associating with me, period, because I have refused to take a side in an argument. And I've just said, so why does this person trigger you? Like, it's not my job to make you feel better about your arrows on somebody else. It's my job to help you look in the mirror and see what it is that's going on inside of you that's causing you to have that experience with that person. Hey, Ann. So what happens is, like, I'll have the conversation. Oh, well, this person did this to me, and this, and there was, it's funny because I work with a lot of people who are prominent in the spiritual field, and they need somebody to talk to as well. And so, like, there have been conversations I've had behind the scenes. Oh, well, this person stole this from me. And I remember there's one person I had that with. This person stole this from me. And then they go off and they have this whole other life. And then they start using this. And we did this together. And they're taking credit for it. And now the person would take my phone calls and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, oh, I want to work on, and obviously you have to work on this. And I was like, yeah. And then my response to them was, instead of saying, oh, yeah, what a terrible person, because it was somebody else we both knew, I said, so yeah, the thing to look at is why you would create that for yourself in your reality. And then the person comes back and they're still trying to shoot arrows at that other person. And I'm like, yes, I understand that kind of situation can be very, very frustrating, right? And very, very, very angering. But the biggest thing for you, so you can get past this, is to say, so what was this here to teach me? Instead of poor me, right? You've seen the meme out there about, like, instead of saying poor me, why did this happen to me? We changed that to the question of, what is this trying to teach me? What is this trying to show me? I like to say, what is this trying to show me within me? But with me just saying that, the person canceled their appointment. They're like, yeah, no, I don't even want to, like, they didn't even want to talk to me anymore, because I wouldn't take sides, because I wouldn't say this person was right and the other person was wrong. So, and I've had other what's funny is I've had multiple situations on that. And then I ask, well, so what's that reflecting to me? Like, I'm just thinking about that now. I've never seen that. But it's also being in this authentic space of neutrality to say, okay, so if it's here, what am I learning from this? What am I putting it in front of myself? Because I create my reality. What did I put it in front of me to learn from? To learn from it. And I've had, like I said, people get so triggered because I don't take their side, because I don't like say, oh yeah, that person is this or whatever. I'll listen to what they have to say, and I listen to the higher self, and I'll be like, okay, I understand what you're saying. And so, have you looked at what it is that's causing you to feel that way about the person? And then it's funny how then they get triggered. Like, there have been multiples who've gotten triggered by me, and then just stop talking to me because of that. And it's like, huh. And I'm not pointing my finger. I don't point fingers. It's just a simple, like, observation. And we're not used to having that observation. And it's because the ego wants to lash out instead of look in the mirror. So that's part of what's so important to look at when we get angry. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter what they've done. It doesn't matter if they have sexually assaulted or abused or killed or whatever. It doesn't matter if they have, like, taken your mail as your neighbor or something, like something like that. What matters is, why do I feel the trigger about the person, right? So people say, well, obviously, if I was sexually abused by this person, I'm going to be triggered by them. And it's like, well, no, the key is to go past the trigger, because the trigger is what the ego is giving you as a message warning to say, so what is it, the catalyst? What is this? What was this, the catalyst for me to learn about myself, to look at about myself? And some might say, it's interesting that some might say, oh, well, that's, that's blaming the victim and everything else. And it's like, in a way it is. It's not really blaming, though. It's just saying, no, we're all self-responsible for our realities and our journeys. So we do have stuff that comes up in our realities that is challenging and a big catalyst. But I've worked with many who've been abused and whatever, and as kids, and then I say, okay, so let's do some work on acceptance, forgiveness, and all that kind of stuff, not only on the other person, but on yourself. And then step back to say, well, what was that my catalyst for? Like, what was it a catalyst for me? And every single person I've worked with on that has seen the catalyst that it brought to them. And then, of course, they try to judge themselves, saying, oh, well, I hate that I created that catalyst. And it's like, well, there's no judgment on it. It just is. So the key is to start looking at the way we interact and who triggers us, right? And why we're triggered by, oh, well, I can't stand this politician because they're so limiting to women. Well, okay. You could just say, well, I choose not to, like, you could just be like, yeah, okay, just not my cup of tea, just not my flavor of ice cream. And I can understand that belief from that perspective, and it's not mine. And if you feel guided to help change that, like, especially if it's at the collective level, then the key is to really get to that place of authenticity and self-responsibility in ourselves first. That's how we change, and people are like, well, how do I change the world? How do I help? How do I do this? And I'm like, the thing for us to do is to really turn it all inside, to turn the mirror on ourselves and say, so, like, why do I care? Why is this triggering me so much? And sometimes we don't have the answer right away, but we can look for the clarity. We can ask for clarity from our guidance. We can do a lot of things that change the way we react, and we just act instead of react, right? Like, I was thinking reacting is like a flash thing, and that's an ego thing, versus a simply being the calm in the storm, being centered and aware and observant. Because the more we do that, the less we react, the less we create more arrows. When we set off more, the less we set off more bombs, so that we can come to a better place of acceptance. And by the way, when we can do that, we can start, and I stop, because here's the thing, when we are talking with each other, right, or we're watching or listening or whatever, when we are set on triggers, right, and we set off by triggers, and we're set on shooting off that arrow to the other person, we do everything we can to simply shut out everything that they are talking about, and just want to send the arrow to them. We don't listen to them. We don't feel them. We simply just shoot it on off, right? When we observe, and when we step back in observance and just watch ourselves, how we feel, what something's bringing up in us, we can, and we don't judge it. We look at it from this, okay, well, all right, well, what is this person here to show me? Then you open your ears and you open your heart in a much different way than otherwise, because you're not judging them. You're not intent on shooting the arrow. You actually say, okay, I'm going to put that arrow up on the wall. I'm going to hang it up right now. I'm going to put it on the shelf. I'm going to step back, and I'm going to listen. Not only to what they say, but to their energy. And the more we work in this, the more you're just, to me, I listen to somebody's energy before I listen to their words anytime. But when we start to do that, then we start connecting in a different way. I don't know if you've ever, like, there have been so many times in my life, and it's just always been something. It's interesting. I think back even when I was a kid, like, I always just decided about who I wanted to be with, or who I wanted to hang out with, or whatever. It wasn't like because this person liked them, or not because this person didn't, or whatever. But like, when you start listening to a person and their energy, you just know what they're about without them even having words. And when you can listen to the energy of the person versus their words, somebody who is eternally cranky, who is otherwise nasty, may not be so much with you. I've had many people in my life that I've had other people that were really judgy about. Good morning, Gloria. That I had no qualms about, because I always had a very pleasant and fruitful interaction with them. And so, like, and then people say, oh, but this person did this to this person, and this to this person, this to this person. I think, wow, but that person, like, great for that person to have signed up to be that message board for those people. And I apparently don't need that message, so I don't need to have that interaction with that person. So when we start looking at the reflection, it's funny how individual our interactions become. And then it's like, well, then we realize that our judgment of people and who they are really have nothing to do with them. It only has to do with us, and vice versa. One of the first things I tell people all the time is, it's none of your business what other people think of you, because what they think of you is where they are on their journey, not where you are on yours. So as we start to look at those kind of things and step back, it gives us a moment to breathe, and that breath of observation that changes the way we act in a situation, from reaction to action, from authenticity, more authenticity. And so when we can do that and you're self-responsible, then I've talked about relationships and how that changes our relationships with our parents and our spouse and our kids and whatever. It's interesting because, like, the one thing I was talking about before that I was about my husband was funny is when I saw what it was like showing me that it's been pounding me on the head about it, I was just like, oh, well, thank you. And then the funny thing was suddenly the energy about that whole situation just shifted like that. And our conversation changed and it was completely different energy, because I wasn't trying to shoot an arrow. And instead I took it back and I looked at the mirror and I was like, oh yeah, okay, thank you. I don't need that anymore. So, this week, that's your home play. Go and look at where you're triggered by people and how you're, like judging people or making comments about people, or like even like a little snide, like, oh, well, this person always does this, or, oh, well, you're like, and it's like, well, why do you have to make a snarky comment about them? Is it because it makes you feel badly about yourself because you're not doing it, or because you're not there? That mirror can be a little bit harsh sometimes in looking in the mirror to say, oh, well, yeah, because I've known like some of the most conscious people, right, are, yeah, it's funny. One of my friends who's just like, yeah, it's funny because you got to listen to that voice in your head when you start saying, oh, well, this person does that. And what the implication is from the ego is, well, I am so spiritual and my way is so much better. And that's, ego kicking in. And it's like, oh, okay. So now there's a need for me to prove myself to be right, for other people to be wrong. Oh, that's, perpetuating duality and separation versus everybody's journey is perfect for them. Everybody's understanding is perfect for where they are right now. And if I'm guided to interject, then I do it. And if I'm not, I don't. People say, oh, but you've got to change, you got to step up to change. And I'm like, I step up if I'm guided. And you know what? Sometimes there's a purpose. Well, there's a purpose for everything. And sometimes there's a purpose I have no idea of why something is laid out, because it needs to motivate people into action sometimes, right? Sometimes a catalyst, well, that's what a catalyst is for, is a catalyst that is brought in our lives is to push us into a direction, or to do something that we wouldn't have done otherwise, or we weren't doing otherwise, even though the higher self was sort of knocking. And first it sort of just like poked us, poke, and then it knocked louder, right? And then it's like a louder thing, and it keeps on getting louder until then it's like, okay, well, then I need to put this situation in front of you that's going to trigger you into changing, because of the outcome of this interaction. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes because we're just ignoring it from ourselves. So another thing for us to do is to commit to that self-awareness and self-responsibility. Commit to observation of our own triggers and our own egoic emotions, and where we're coming at things from separation and exclusivity, and where we're still judging things good or bad or right and wrong, and saying, okay, but if there is no right or wrong or good and bad, it's just all part of the big symphony of this multiverse. And it's all presenting itself in the way for it to perfectly play its note for my reality and my particular, purpose and lessons that I wanted to learn and live out. What is it showing me? What is it trying to tell me? Because if it's already triggering me at this level, I really don't want it to get to the next level. And, unfortunately, when we get to things like presidents and people who are who affect essentially a lot of people, that means that we have collectively ignored messages at the very individual level for so long that the message has had to have gotten so loud to force us into consciousness on a catalyst for change. So on that, I want you to look at that this week. Look at that in your life. Look at who's triggering you, who you have judgments about that you are angry with. And then the key is to ask yourself, why do I care? Why do I care? Why does that bring this judgment up in me? And get to a place of what I call self-responsibility. It's an exercise I do in a class, Trinity 1 class that I teach. It's the self-mastery class. That's really key, because when we get to that self-responsibility to say, oh, well, when this happens, I feel like this. In honesty, you don't have to tell anybody else. When you get to that place, it's quite the realization then when you commit to looking at that, completing it and resolving it within yourself, then you'll find that that energy goes away and that interaction with that individual, and or you just don't have that individual in your reality anymore. So it's funny how things will just automatically change and shift. It's an automatic shift, and we don't have to think there has to be a process. It can just change like that. It's for us to get the aha, I got the message from myself and my higher self, and yay, I can move on now. So look at that this week. Thank you for joining me. Have a great one. We'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter signing out with this week's Living the Shift.